today, October 1st, marks the beginning of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. With me now, it is my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Miriam Mutebi. She is a breast cancer surgeon. Karibu Daktari.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia. Really excited to be back.
I am always in awe of you and what you do. And I remember when I was ill in August and we bumped into each other at the Aga Khan. Yeah. I'd actually asked the receptionist because I'd seen your name on the wall, and I was like, I know her. You know, she told me, I'm a Shaenda. So I was like, okay. And then there you are, like an archangel. You know,
so you invoked my name. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yes. And it's really unfortunate that you're doing so well, because by you doing well, it means others are not doing so well. So before we get into the situation of the reality of breast cancer in Kenya, I want to understand firstly, who is Dr. Miriam Mutebi?
Okay. I like to say I'm in the hope business. So I like to say a breast cancer surgeon by day and a clinical researcher by night. And really, but my underlying goal is, how do you make a difference? How do you spread hope? Because I think for the longest time, especially in our setting, Olivia, the narrative has been that cancer equals death. And so it's really looking at how do we shift narratives around that. And so that's really, you sort of ask what gets you up in the morning, and it's really that opportunity. And I wouldn't say we're doing well. I think we can definitely do more. And there's lots that needs to be done, and we basically need all hands on deck, and which is why I'm really excited to have this opportunity just to share and really brainstorm, as a nation, how do we shift narratives around this?
You are a very eclectic person. Because when I spoke to Dr. Hussein, who's, my son's pediatrician, he's like, you have to get this lady on your show. She's a fantastic designer. And I was like, oh, okay. So I took the information, but I looked at the name. And I was like, but I know this woman.
Yes.
Maybe there's another one, I know there's another Olivia Oteno who does, some actuarial science or whatever she does.
Yes.
But the point is, you're also a fashion designer?
No, I wish I was. So funny story. When I was younger, I used to design dresses and things and stuff. And so one of the sort of ambitions was to become this big fashion designer and stuff.
So
before.
Not a breast surgeon.
No, they were like,
wasn't a big enough ambition. Like my mom was thinking, you see, you and your low goals.
No, my word, there were 6 different things I wanted to do. I think with every teenager at the end of high school, there's 8 different things you want to do, including fashion and stuff. But right now, what I try to do, and learning from the best as well, is sometimes I do co-design with designers, but it's really trying to promote African women and African women in fashion. So you'll notice I tend to wear lots of Ankara, lots of prints from the continent and stuff.
And accessories.
Exactly. So all of this is carefully curated by
Who are you wearing, if you don't mind me asking?
This is a Blackfly, Ruth Abade, who is amazing. She does lots of upcycled stuff, lots of jewelry and things. So, but yeah.
First name
really
is?
Good. Ruth.
Male, female?
Ruth Abade. She's female.
Oh, she. Okay, because you said he does. So I was like,
no, she.
I'm not gonna judge. So tell me about what it was like for you growing up. I know we're kind of going off, but I really want to understand who you are and what led you to your current position. So what was your upbringing like?
Sure. I had a fairly, I would say, urban upbringing growing up in Nairobi. Probably going to Catholic parochial and going to Kianda, but then sort of sitting down after that and thinking, okay, what do I want to do? I think, as I was saying with every teenager, it's kind of so many choices, so little time. What do I? And I think I remember I wanted to do law, I wanted to do architecture, I wanted to do medicine, I wanted to do pharmacy.
Is that something that is instilled in you in certain schools, or is that your parents or your family influence? Where did all that come from?
I guess because
they're very diverse. Let's be
I know.
The skill sets and the intelligence and the grades and everything required for all those different fields are quite diverse.
I know, and I think it's because one of the things that we perhaps don't give our parents or teachers enough credit for is just expanding your horizons and possibilities. In primary school, in Catholic parochial, I think my first love was when I got introduced to the library. So. That is how.
Mumbi, this is over. We're done. Done. Please, just play music. What are you talking about? There are girls who are thinking.
For me, it was like, you're getting to this world, you're
Yeah.
opening up these books, there's all these realms and possibilities.
Yes.
And I think my dad was a little cheeky because what used to happen was we were living in Langata and we used to have to go to school across town. And what he would do is, like give you a book to read, and like you can read on the bus or whatever, and so you're reading all these interesting like novels, Chronicles of Narnia or whatever, and you're thinking, when I grow up I want to write or I want to become a writer. So that was even part of the bucket list.
Yes.
as
Oh my
well.
goodness.
And then
Okay.
you get to school and they're also encouraging you to explore your different talents, whether it's music, whether it's art. At some point, like in Kianda, we would have, most high schools, you have to do musical festivals and stuff. So we were actually doing mimes and things, like really getting outside your
I
comfort
heard that people
zone.
used to go for those festivals to try and meet boys.
I know.
Whereas you are there to actually do the mimes.
But like we didn't get the memo. I'm like,
It's like, okay. But then again, you're a breast surgeon, so now we see. Mumbi, we should have focused on the mime.
no. I think there isn't any right or wrong.
Yeah.
You could actually do both, multitask.
So tell me about the interest in the specific fields and what ignited that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what happened is, again, sort of by the time you're getting to high school, you want to do 10 million different things. I ended up spending a bit of time in all of those, and then deciding to go into decided to go into medicine. And then after medicine, you get to rotate through different rotations. And then for me, it was like, oh, I'm definitely going to do surgery.
Yes.
And then now with surgery, we have what we call end of rotationitis. Like the end of the rotation, you're like, oh, I can do that. But then part of my rotation was through the breast surgery unit. And for me, it was almost not really an epiphany, but really just like mind blowing, because what we'd read in school and in the textbooks was that, breast cancer was a disease of your 60s and 70s. And typically the quote unquote poster child was this, elderly lady who hadn't, had any children, who hadn't breastfed, and who, had never gotten pregnant. And sitting in the clinic, I'm seeing patients in their 30s and 40s, all having all of these supposedly protective breast factors, the fact that they've had multiple children, they've breastfed, they've all had, maybe most of them have had their first child before 30, all of which have been traditionally
Not
protected.
necessarily having cases of breast cancer in their family.
Exactly. And so all of this just really said, there's something different going on here, and somebody needs to get to the bottom of this. And I think part of the sort of pull towards breast surgery was really trying, because again, it's really trying to create that safe space, because even when sitting in the clinic, despite a lady comes in and she comes in with a breast concern, it's not that she's not thinking about, it's just, something normal. She's thinking it's a cancer. And then with ladies, they're not just thinking, this is a breast cancer, period. They're 3-4 steps ahead. They're thinking, what's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to my kids? So it's really creating that safe space where we can talk about things, empower women, learn about their bodies, learn about their breasts, really spend time, because it's not enough just to tell a lady, like, you're fine. It's really what's going on. Why do I have this pain? Why do I have this lump? So really trying to go that extra mile is kind of what drew me to breast surgery and breast cancer.
That is phenomenal. I'm going to ask you one thing.
Sure.
Dr. Miriam Mutebi.
Yes.
I want to know what you're reading. I want to know what you're watching. And I want to know what you're listening to.
Okay.
What are you reading? Just the first one that comes off your head.
The book that I actually have here
Which
right
is
now
which one?
is a book
It never
by...
stopped. That book is still with her.
And it's like, this is a Better
Yes.
by Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon.
Okay.
But he's really talking about how do we get better? How do we get better? Because
As surgeons or as people? As a race?
just
As a species?
as a health system, as
Okay.
health system providers, as a community of practice. And I think the big tweaks or really thought reflection points for him is it's not just the healthcare providers. It's how do we mobilize the community? How do we actively engage all of us? Because what I think we've in terms of the approach to medicine, we've stopped, thinking that we're coming down from the mountain and, with the 2 tablets and telling you to swallow them. Okay. We're now saying we're partners in your health. And so as partners, we do need to empower you, give you the tools in order to make informed decisions about your health. And so how do we then, get our communities activated? How do we move our communities and ourselves as well into changing our health-seeking behavior? But I don't routinely just read.
The book is called Better. The author is a surgeon called Atul Gawanda. All right. Okay. We know what you're reading. What are you watching?
What did I last watch? I was traveling recently,
Shock
so
me.
I was actually watching Batman.
Oh, the one that's like 8 hours.
Yes.
Like the never-ending Batman.
And I watched, interestingly enough, Encanto, because I like musicals and
nice.
stuff. And I was watching this because I think it's by the guy who did Hamilton.
Yes.
And so, as I said, theatre. You can see I drift towards theatres, whether it's surgical or
The book is better. The movies are Batman and Encanto. What are you listening to?
Listening to, this morning I was listening to, one of my first loves is Idris Elba.
No. First, second, everything. And I met him at Tribe. We were just sitting there having breakfast.
Are you serious?
I used to work there.
Oh,
and
my
I get
word.
to work and I'm going for my cappuccino. And I realize, wait a minute.
This is Idris.
That guy, no, it's not.
It can't be.
I think that guy looks so much like Idris Elba.
So did you go and ask?
He was so hot. I'm like, this guy, he's sitting with like 2 other ladies, The first thing I do, I go straight to the reservations manager. I'm like, who do we have in the hotel?
Yeah.
Some random names. I want to know if Idris Elba is in the hotel. Yes, it was Idris Elba. And yes, he's even... He's the SpiceFM flame. Anyway, we're almost out of time. Tell me, what are you listening to?
No, so his
new rap?
latest, the Vroom song, the one.
Mumbi, pull up, pull it out. No,
Either
I'm
way,
actually
it's
gonna play for you. Fantastic. I am here with breast cancer surgeon, Dr. Miriam Mutebi. We are marking Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This is Double O Direct. SpiceFM. Be aware that there is a live stream situation happening. Standardmedia.co.ke. Don't just listen, watch Double O Direct. Good afternoon. I'm Olivia Otieno. In a few minutes, songs by Pink and Lady Gaga. But right now, as we start Breast Cancer Awareness Month, I am joined by breast cancer surgeon, Dr. Miriam Mutebi. How are the statistics? You told me about your time in med school and all your different rotations compared to what you learned then. Yeah, and the statistics that you were aware of then and now. What's the trajectory?
We're definitely seeing an increase in cancers globally. And I think for the first time, breast cancer is now the most commonly diagnosed cancer, not just in Kenya, but really across.
I thought it was esophageal.
No. So our top, if you look at our top 5 cancers in Kenya specifically, it's breast, cervical, prostate, esophageal, and then colorectal cancers. So in Kenya, we know that if you look at the data from 2020, 1 out of every 8 cancers diagnosed was a breast cancer. But I think what is even more concerning and really should cause alarm, Olivia, is that if we look at it, we're saying that seven ladies every day in Kenya die as a result of breast cancer. And so
seven daily.
7, yes.
Wait.
I know. Trying to fathom.
Yeah.
Doing the math.
Yeah.
But looking at the number of deaths divided by the number of days that we have, then they're saying we're actually having 7 ladies a day dying as a result of cancer.
Diagnosis, because it is possible, depending on when it's caught, to go for treatment and to prolong life.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that we sort of shift narratives around this, because we know, Olivia, caught early, managed appropriately, breast cancers have an excellent prognosis, meaning that if you look at the 5-year, 10-year, 20-year 30-year survival, it's almost 100% for early breast cancers, meaning you're more likely to die from something else than your cancer.
Yes.
So if we look at the situation in the West where we have routine screening and early detection, if you look at early cancers, their sort of, long-term survival is almost 100%. And really looking at how do we then shift narratives in our setting. I know we've done, there have been a couple of efforts in order to try and increase awareness, because I think for the longest time, the challenges have been that not only are our patients diagnosed with advanced disease, they frequently do not complete their care.
Okay.
And if we look at the reasons behind that, we see sort of like three broad factors. The first one being the fact that patients have to pay out of pocket in order for them to access care, which frequently results in financial toxicity.
Does that include screening?
Yeah, so screening, for instance, is not covered by the many, including the many insurance will not cover screening, and the public health, the national health insurance as well doesn't necessarily cover screening at this point.
Yes.
I think there are conversations to try and see how they can improve that. But again, it's not just the screening, it's the what happens after the screening. When you get a lump, how do you get it diagnosed? How do you get it treated? And so the NHIF has tried to mitigate some of the costs in terms of they're now able to support some of the treatments for whether it's surgery, whether it's radiotherapy, whether it's chemotherapy, but that's still not 100%. And so it's looking at how do we pick these up earlier, because they're not necessarily covering screening. How do we create that culture of actually health-seeking behavior? Because if you talk to the average lady, she's like, why am I going to look for trouble? Why am I feel fine? Why am I going to the hospital to find something?
Yeah, if I go, then they'll tell me I'm
exactly,
sick and
exactly.
I feel fine.
Precisely. And you're like, ironically, you do want to go to the hospital and when you're feeling fine and find something, because that's the time that you get to have the least interventions in terms of whether it's surgery or other treatments, and it's also cheaper. I mean, it's not going to necessarily break the bank.
Yes.
And then, of course, if we look at the other broad category, Olivia, we see that unfortunately, our health systems have also played a part in sort of getting our patients diagnosed with advanced disease, because if we look at data from sub-Saharan Africa, we see that patients on average will see, and this might be a bit mind-blowing, we would see 4 to 6 healthcare providers before a definitive diagnosis of their cancer is made.
When you say healthcare providers, you're meaning 4 to 5 different doctors?
Yeah, doctors, nurses, clinical officers, anyone along the care sort of health continuum.
Crazy.
Exactly. So it really means that from our level, we need to do more in terms of educating our healthcare providers, especially our primary healthcare providers, and what are the common signs and symptoms. And so that's part of the efforts that have been occurring as part of the National Cancer Control Program. They've started e-learning platforms to inform healthcare providers, and they've done this in collaboration with professional associations like the Kenya Society for Hematology and Oncology. But it's really looking at how do we get those messages percolating to the ground, both from the community side and from the healthcare provider side. And then I think the broader category, one of the biggest categories that perhaps we don't maybe talk about as much, Olivia, is the fact that the social cultural barriers that still exist in this day and age.
Stigma.
Exactly. Well, stigma, yes. Stigma is one of those, but also looking at the fact that in many settings, women are not the primary determinants of their health-seeking behavior, right? And as such require either financial support or sometimes, in some cases, even permission in order for them to access care. And then we look at things like stigma where, we always say telling a woman in sub-Saharan Africa or in Kenya, for instance, depending on where you are, that you have a cancer. It's not just you have a cancer, it's you could lose your livelihood, you could lose your family. So we've seen, as part of our research, quite a bit of family disintegration around a cancer diagnosis. And the reasons are myriad. There's a stigma. There's the fact that some people just say, we can't afford to support, your treatment. So, throw you out. And so there are really those nuances. And I think one of the other aspects that we've seen as well is what we call collectivism, which is a big fancy name just to say that I always say as Africans, our biggest strength is our community.
Yes.
But it can also be a double-edged sword when our patients don't have agency. So for instance, as a breast cancer surgeon, I would see a patient with an early cancer and give her the option of, you could have either breast conservation where you remove just the lump, or we do a mastectomy where we remove the entire breast, and you sort of give the options because both of them are equivalent. And you tell her, go home and think about the options, and then you maybe have a couple of days days later, you have a clan elder coming in and saying, "We have decided." I'm like, "Who is we?" You know, you're like, "We have decided she will have a mastectomy." And I'm like, but that's not what the patient wants. But you see, unless we give our women agency, and it's not just agency for the agency's sake, because if she's not able to pay, she's going to say, I mean, what can I do? They're the ones paying, right?
Exactly.
So it's really trying to think about how do we empower our women. So it's really part of, it's not just cancers, it's how do we get, what is it, that Sustainable Development Goal 5, full and active participation of women. How do we get them to the stage where they're able to take charge of their own health and give them the resources to do that? And so I think those are the three broad categories that actually translate into why unfortunately quite a number of our patients are still getting diagnosed with advanced disease. However, I like to say there is a silver lining. I think there's been a lot in the last 10 years. There's been a lot of, I would say, deliberate investment in terms of, and it's something we do need to acknowledge the government in terms of increasing access to treatment services, whether it's surgery, whether it's radiotherapy, and trying to decentralize those. You're seeing probably every other day there's a regional cancer center being opened up and things. And that's also helping to bring care closer to people. We've also seen a lot of push from the advocacy community, the grassroots community awareness, which is really, so like right now we're definitely seeing, I would say 10 years ago, you would say maybe about 80% of patients would be diagnosed with advanced disease. And that sort of come down to maybe around 60, 70. So we're definitely making strides, but that more effort needs to be done.
Joined by breast cancer surgeon Dr. Miriam Mutebi. We are marking Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Shocking statistics. I wanted to find out, because we're hearing of earlier and earlier indecencies with regards to age, shouldn't we have awareness campaigns in our high schools so that these girls are better prepared, better informed as they become young women?
I think the whole concept of breast awareness is really something that should be encouraged across the board, whether it's boys and girls, men or women. And I think because sometimes people sort of link the two, the breast cancer screening or awareness, that the two are sort of separate contexts. Breast cancer awareness is a broader concept, really about being aware of your breasts, learning what any changes are, not to ignore symptoms and signs. And so really that should be encouraged as part of, developmental anyway. The challenge, of course, is that I think the reason why people sort of have a misconception is you're not going to necessarily go and do breast cancer screening, for instance, in high school students, because they're not necessarily the right demographic. If
you were telling me that for mammograms, for instance, it's only encouraged from your 40s?
Exactly. So if you look at our national screening guidelines, we recommend an annual mammogram from about 40 all the way up to 55. That's just based on our national data, because what happens is, Olivia, if we look at our average age of diagnosis, it's between 40 to 55. And so that's the biggest age group. Having said that, we still see that at least 30% of our patients are diagnosed in less than 40 years of age. And so if you look at the national screening guidelines, the screening and early detection guidelines, and there's a difference between screening and early detection. Screening basically means you're not symptomatic, you don't feel anything, you go in, they pick up something and we get it sorted. Whereas with early detection, it means you're able to pick up lumps earlier, as opposed to having them smolder and stay in for a while before getting detected. And so as part of the early detection strategy, which is what is encouraged for younger populations, and we talk about things like clinical breast exam. And so we say from the age of about 25 all the way up to 35, then the national recommendation is at least every 3 years go in, see a healthcare provider, have them do what they call a clinical breast exam, where they'll try and examine your breasts and see
Are
if
there
there's
any
anything.
cultural barriers to that? Because a lot of our healthcare providers are male. Just looking at the statistics, are there barriers to women going to a male healthcare provider and saying, examine my breasts?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on the cultural context. We definitely have, and again, you're starting me off on my research and kind of looking at, we look at barriers to why women sometimes fail to access care because sometimes because of social cultural barriers, women don't feel comfortable having somebody of the opposite gender, or sometimes they have a bit of discomfort, but will only wait until it's absolutely that they can't
Chronic.
do anything. Exactly.
Yeah.
That they'll go in and say, okay, fine. And so that's why there's really a push to really diversify the workforce.
Okay.
And I think you've started me on my favorite subject, which is really around the role of women and having more diversity in the workforce, because we know that the majority of the workforce, for instance, 70% is female, but that doesn't necessarily translate into specialities like surgery. And so it's really trying to, how do we engage and mentor women to take up these specialities? Because again, you have a woman coming in and she's seeing a shosho, for instance, coming in and she sees somebody her grandson's age, and she doesn't want to say, listen, I have a breast lump or I have vaginal bleeding, which is a sign of early, cervical cancer, for instance. But because it's taboo, I mean, how am I going to tell my grandson that this is what's going on? And so really trying to diversify the workforce, increase the women, increase the visibility of healthcare providers, but also empower those healthcare providers to actually use those opportunities for interaction. It's also about integrated care.
Yes.
I mean, I might be coming in, you were sort of saying you might be coming in for a headache, or you might be coming in for the childhood immunization. It's not just seeing you as little blocks. It's
Yes.
how do we have that holistic approach where we say, oh, by the way, have when was the last time you had any screening? Have you
Yes.
had a pap smear? Are there any other concerns going on? So it's really trying to leverage on those clinical encounters that actually goes along.
Joined by breast cancer surgeon Dr. Miriam Mutebi. We are marking Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Shocking statistics. I wanted to find out, because we're hearing of earlier and earlier indecencies with regards to age. Shouldn't we have awareness campaigns in our high schools so that these girls are better prepared, better informed as they become young women?
I think the whole concept of breast awareness is really something that should be encouraged across the board, whether it's boys and girls, men or women. And I think because sometimes people sort of link the two, the breast cancer screening or awareness, that the two are sort of separate contexts. Breast cancer awareness is a broader concept, really about being aware of your breasts, learning what any changes are, not to ignore symptoms and signs. And so really that should be encouraged as part of, developmental anyway.
Yes.
The challenge, of course, is that I think the reason why people sort of have a misconception is you're not going to necessarily go and do breast cancer screening, for instance, in high school students, because they're not necessarily the right demographic. If
You were
look,
telling me that for mammograms, for instance, it's only encouraged from your 40s?
Exactly. So if you look at our national screening guidelines,
Yes.
we recommend an annual mammogram from about 40 all the way up to 55. That's just based on our national data, because what happens is, Olivia, if we look at our average age of diagnosis, it's between 40 to 55. And so that's the biggest age group. Having said that, we still see that at least 30% of our patients are diagnosed in less than 40 years of age. And so if you look at the national screening guidelines, the screening and early detection guidelines, and there's a difference between screening and early detection. Screening basically means you're not symptomatic, you don't feel anything, you go in, they pick up something and we get it sorted. Whereas with early detection, it means you're able to pick up lumps earlier, as opposed to having them smolder and stay in for a while before getting detected.
Yeah.
And so as part of the early detection strategy, which is what is encouraged for younger populations, and we talk about things like clinical breast exam. And so we say from the age of about 25 all the way up to 35, then the national recommendation is at least every 3 years go in, see a healthcare provider, have them do what they call a clinical breast exam, where they'll try and examine your breasts and see
Are
if
there
there's
any
anything.
cultural barriers to that? Because a lot of our healthcare providers are male. just looking at the statistics, are there barriers to women going to a male healthcare provider and saying, examine my breasts?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on the cultural context. We definitely have, and again, you're starting me off on my research and kind of we look at barriers to why women sometimes fail to access care because sometimes because of social cultural barriers, women don't feel comfortable having somebody of the opposite gender, or sometimes they have a bit of discomfort, but will only wait until it's absolutely that they can't
Chronic.
do anything. Exactly.
Yeah.
That they'll go in and say, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's really a push to really diversify the workforce.
Okay.
And I think you've started me on my favorite subject, which is really around the role of women and having more diversity in the workforce, because we know that the majority of the workforce, for instance, 70% is female, but that doesn't necessarily translate into specialities like surgery. And so it's really trying to, how do we engage and mentor women to take up these specialities? Because again, you have a woman coming in and she's seeing a shosho, for instance, coming in and she sees somebody her grandson's age, and she doesn't want to say, listen, I have a breast lump or I have vaginal bleeding, which is a sign of early, cervical cancer, for instance. But because it's taboo, I mean, how am I going to tell my grandson that this is what's going on? And so really trying to diversify the workforce, increase the women, increase the visibility of healthcare providers, but also empower those healthcare providers to actually use those opportunities for interaction. It's also about integrated care.
Yes.
I mean, I might be coming in, you were sort of saying you might be coming in for a headache, or you might be coming in for the childhood immunization. It's not just seeing you as little blocks. It's
Yes.
how do we have that holistic approach where we say, oh, by the way, have when was the last time you had any screening? Have you had a pap smear? Are there any other concerns going on? So it's really trying to leverage on those clinical encounters that actually goes along.
I actually experienced personally is I was in the field in Kipkibe, and Sasini, they have a health facility, and we were filming, and I remember getting into the facility and seeing an incredible amount of medical information as infographics and posters. And I thought to myself, how amazing is this? Because I always assumed that outside of Nairobi, it's very limited. And yes, there are limitations, but here I was in some clinic, really far outside, and the amount of information and exactly what you're saying, it was a completely holistic approach to health care. Whereas you'd have the women coming in for clinics, with their newborns, but they'd also get exposed to all these other possible, health concerns, so giving them the opportunity to engage with their healthcare provider about that. And I think that is absolutely brilliant. We had a question because we'd posed this about warriors, survivors, and supporters. And one question somebody said is, how do you know? And that now comes back to early detection vis-a-vis screening. Maybe if you can just expound on those two concepts a little bit.
Sure. So if we talk about screening, which is basically where you're picking up disease that doesn't have any, if we look at screening, which is basically about disease that doesn't have any symptoms, then how you would know is you would go for regular screening. And what might happen is that you've had a mammogram and they've picked up some abnormality and decided to investigate it further, do a biopsy, which confirms cancer. Now, the thing about breast cancer signs and symptoms are they can be initially fairly non-specific. For instance, one might have a lump. And what we do know, again, Olivia, is that 9 out of 10 lumps are not a cancer.
Let's repeat that. 9 out of 10 lumps are not a cancer.
But you
panic.
don't want to miss the 1 out of 10. That is.
Okay.
So the other thing and so we say all lumps need to be investigated. So don't assume. The other thing that people sort of attribute is because the lump is painless, it's not anything to worry about. Actually, the typical presentation that we get of a breast cancer is a painless breast lump.
Okay.
Right? So pain on its own is not necessarily a sign of anything sinister in the breast. However, most women will, because the breast is, I think, one of the most dynamic organs in the body, is changing from month to month. You probably will have what we get cyclic pain, where your breasts are a little uncomfortable. They maybe swell up a little towards towards the beginning of your cycle or towards the end. But if you are having persistent pain, then that could be a sign that you do need to get reviewed by a medical practitioner. But however, pain on its own is not necessarily a sign of a breast cancer. However, as you now tend to get more advanced disease, you may start to notice skin changes. You may notice dimpling of the skin. You may notice pulling or changes of the nipple, like pulling inwards of the nipple, and it, like if your nipple has been, projecting outwards and then suddenly going in. There's usually a panic around this, like, but my nipples are inside. No, there's some people who are born with inverted nipples, but we're saying you've had your nipple a certain shape, and then you've noticed a difference in the dimension that would at least should trigger you to go and see a clinician. The other thing that you might get is a nipple discharge. Most of the time it could be bloody. However, as I said, there's several other things that can cause a nipple discharge. However, all of these signs and symptoms, especially if you notice them, really should be your trigger to say, not just to assume, listen, I have a lump, it's not painful, it's fine, or I'm having a nipple discharge and it's not bloody, it's fine. No. You do need to at least get all your breast concerns addressed. And you would rather go and be told, listen, this is absolutely nothing to worry about, which is what we do 90% of the time, but you don't want to miss, that 10%.
Is size a factor?
No, absolutely not. And
I'm laughing.
I'm laughing because sometimes sisters, I always say it's the sisters who have these questions, because sisters come and say, I have small breasts. Why does my sister have larger breasts? And I'm like, well, but they would think that, sometimes if I have a lump, it's because I have a large breast, or people think that if I have smaller breasts, I'm safe. We're like, no. We always say, if you want to see who's at risk for breast cancer, we call it the mirror test. Stand in front of the mirror. If you can see a reflection, then you are at risk. Now, that risk might vary slightly, but it's definitely there. And so, of course, in terms of looking at risk, because I think that would probably be the follow-up question, how do I know my risk? There's things that you can change. We call modifiable risk factors, and stuff that you can't. We can't change the fact, Olivia, that we're all growing older, which in itself is a...
I am going to change it. No.
You're like, I defy you, stars.
Lies. Not today, Satan.
We're growing younger. Yeah, no, shame. And then we can't change the fact that we're female, because that in itself increases your risk of breast cancer. Sometimes a family history, which is, again, one of those important things. You can have a family history. But it's important to note, Olivia, that that's only in 5 to 10% of all breast cancers.
Oh.
Exactly. The 90% is what you call sporadic, because sometimes people say, okay, I don't have anyone in my family, I'm safe. And we're like, no, the converse is, if we look at the majority of our patients, nobody's had a family history. They're actually the first in their family. So it's really important to address that. Of course, there's certain lifestyle. Now, those are things that we can't change. You can't change your family.
Yes.
But the things that we can change are your diet and exercise. And perhaps we can get into a little about that later.
Dr. Miriam Mutebi, breast cancer surgeon. Got my stunners on. It was just too hot, Hapa. But we are talking about breast cancer awareness. Did you like that? That was for you.
Oh, yeah. No. I definitely appreciated that. Thank you so much.
We're on that same page. You and me, same WhatsApp group. Every series, every track, everything Idris Elba is just fire, man.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, Luther, oh my God, like.
I can't even. And then he had that series, the comedy. Love it. So tell me, I know we don't have much time. Everyone wants to know risk factors, not just that, but prevention. Okay. What is within our power in order to avoid a diagnosis of breast cancer?
Right. And I think the thing that to realize, and I think the first thing, Olivia, is that when we talk about risk,
yes,
having a risk doesn't mean you will get a cancer. Not having a risk doesn't mean you won't get it either. Because we get quite a number of ladies coming in and they're saying, listen, I don't drink, I don't do this, why did I get my cancer? And the reality is, because we're all at risk, it's important to go for regular screening. However, we talked previously about the things that we couldn't possibly change. You can't change your family, you can't change the fact you're growing older, you can't change the fact that you're female, but the two things that consistently make a difference in terms of reducing our risk is diet and exercise. Now, you were asking earlier, like, what is it? Why are we seeing this increase in cancers globally, and maybe specifically in low and middle income countries such as ours? And one of the drivers, we think, is what we call the westernization of lifestyle.
Yes.
Where, for instance, our grandmothers would, wake up, go to the field, spend a whole day digging, walk home, whereas we are now currently,
I see people driving 100 meters.
Exactly.
I'm like, so I asked my neighbor the other day, where are you going? I'm going to, but I'm like, it's 100 meters.
Exactly. It's the whole culture of walking is lost in us. We get into our Ubers, we go to the office, spend the whole day seated, drive back through KFC, go back. And so that whole point to hand, really just sedentary lifestyle has actually been shown to contribute. So obesity as well is a risk factor.
But it's not just about a sedentary lifestyle.
Exactly.
It's about the fact that people use it as a mark of success.
Exactly.
It's really,
exactly.
Someone asked me if I wanted a ride the other day. I was walking somewhere. They could not believe that I'm actually just walking to that place.
Exactly.
They're like, no, are you sure? Come, let me drive you. I'm like, please don't.
Yeah. And I think it's that sort of, as you said, cultural shift.
Yeah.
In the sense that we need to get healthier, we need to get moving more. And I think even in terms of urban planning, like, we need to start being more deliberate and intentional about this.
We believe as a society that your big car is a status symbol,
Exactly.
whereas the real flex should be pavements.
Exactly.
Can we just insist, what is his name? Sakaja Johnson. Pavement. Tafadhali.
Exactly. Walkways.
Tuweke tu pavements.
And from a doctor's perspective, your real flex should be your BMI. Like,
exactly.
How much are you weighing in?
Exactly.
Exactly.
So when it comes to, I usually don't like the word diet. I prefer nutrition.
Yes.
Because diet has a really negative connotation and
absolutely
body negativity and all that stuff. So when it comes to nutrition,
yes,
what are some of the things we should be ingesting and some of the things we should avoid?
I think that's a good question, because we usually get asked, what do I eat? What do I avoid?
What do you eat?
And one of the things we say is, as long as you're eating healthy, because people think that, certain foods are, high in antioxidants, so that we get a lot of what you call food faddism. And I think you've probably seen the rounds on social media where somebody starts quail's eggs and then a business explodes because this reduces or, cures cancer.
Goji beans.
Yeah,
goji.
and pepinos and things.
Nonsense. Dengu.
So we say, as long as you're eating healthy, and what does eating healthy mean? We say at least half the plate needs to be vegetables. And we say, again, Olivia, look at what are your food preparation methods? You would probably have maybe, you can have it raw vegetables. But however, we say, if you're going to torture the vegetables on the stove for 2 hours
they're even about to be eaten. Don't
and expect
them.
any nutritional, value. So we say, if you're having things like cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli, the cauliflower, you still needs to have the crunch. Otherwise, if it's, you're biting into it and it's like, porridge.
If it's mushy,
exactly.
If it's mushy broccoli.
You've missed the boat. And then we're saying, like, for leafy.
Your soup.
Exactly. You swirl it around and swallow. Yeah, but if we're having things like sukuma wiki and the spinach, you kind of want to have them at that bright green before they get to a darker green.
Yes.
That's kind of what you want to strive for. And then we say a quarter of the plate needs to be carbohydrates, and carbohydrates sometimes get a bad rep, but we always say try and have foods that have what we call a low glycemic index, meaning that they have more complex sugars. What happens is with the foods that have a high glycemic index, meaning high sugar level, glyca is Latin for glucose. We always say, guys ask which foods are these? We're like, everything good in life. Just joking. But you find that the pizzas, the more processed foods,
I
the
tell
cakes,
people, if it came from the ground.
Yes,
Did
yes.
it come from the ground?
Exactly.
And how
exactly.
from the ground is it?
Exactly. That's a good premise to have. The less from the ground it is, the more you find that they have a higher sugar load. And the body's response to that is it gives you a high insulin, which is the hormone that produces, that's involved with digestion of sugars. And what happens is high sugar, high insulin, sugar levels drop rapidly.
Yes.
And so what you're doing through the day is you're having this
Yo-yoing.
seesawing. Exactly. And that's why you're like, dude, I just had 4 slices of pizza. Why am I hungry again after, an hour or so? So more complex sugars. We say less processed, the whole wheat flours, the brown ugali, the oats and stuff. But it's, again, one of those, it's a lifestyle change. You're not going to wake up one morning and say, from this day forward, all chapatis.
By the way, let me tell you.
Yes.
If you want to woo me, if you're like thinking, you know what, Olivia, bring me chapatis. We will fight. You tell me I can never eat chapatis again? Divorce. Let me tell you.
You're like instant grounds for dismissal.
No. In fact, it's in the prenup.
Exactly. So we're saying gently ease into the chapati. Start off with white flour, then go to half white, half brown,
No.
and then gradually ease.
Don't eat 5. Kula tatu.
Exactly.
Then maybe mbili. Start like that. Add more dengu, add more beans, add more.
Exactly. And again, the remaining quarter of the plate, as you said, is actually protein. And there's really good sources of plant protein, as you well know, and what you've just mentioned, the beans, the peas, the legumes and stuff. We say if you're going to have animal protein, then try and lean more towards the white meats, which is the fish and chicken. It doesn't mean that you can't have red meat, but try and limit your portions.
How should it be prepared? Is there anything in the preparation of red meat or in animal products that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think generally as a rule, the less fried and less processed. I think as a food preparation method, we're saying minimal oil, so more of the grilling rather than deep frying.
But I heard that choma is cancer causing.
Yeah, so the what's happened is, if you look at the fat, and this is why people are saying probably lean more towards, no pun intended, lean red meat, because it's the combination of the fat with the fire that has potential carcinogens. Nobody's really sort of demonstrated that, but you're saying if you're having red meat, for instance, try and ensure that one, it's lean red meat, and try and ensure that you limit your portion, so maybe to 2 to 3. So it's not choma every day. Ad nauseum, and then also looking exactly, and few and far in between. Again, also having less salted, smoked products also minimizes your risks around that.
What about movement? You've talked about nutrition. Now movement,
extremely important. And if we look at our advice, especially around movement, is because if you look at the World Health Organization recommendations, they're saying 30 minutes of cardio 3 times a week, and very few other than yourself are perhaps achieving that, right? And we always say the advice is find something that you like to do, whether it's, some people like to go to the gym, bless them, others like to dance, Zumba, whatever, skipping. Find something that will keep you engaged. And then we say small but consistent changes. So you can tell yourself, I'm going to have at least maybe 30 minutes a week, and I'm going to do that consistently for 3 to 4 months and try and build that into, because you're really talking about lifestyle changes. I think the problem that most of us do is we say, right, I'm turning over a new leaf. Mimi uyo kwa gym Monday to Tuesday for 2 weeks straight.
A lot of people don't know this, but I've lost about 24, 25 kilos.
Is it?
And I did it with, I started small because some things like only taking the stairs. I intentionally live in an apartment with no lift and on the top floor.
Yeah.
So I don't have an option but to walk up and down the stairs.
Like you need to get to your house.
Right? Even when I go to shopping malls, I avoid the escalator and I avoid the lift. I take the stairs.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's you see, when you talk about lifestyle changes, that is a lifestyle change.
Absolutely.
So I see a lot of people who they get to the gym, they see me at the gym, and maybe they're put off, or they feel that it's an overnight thing. Yeah. But when I showed them my before photo, they're like, that's not you. I'm like, that's me. That's not you. I'm
and you're
that's
like,
me.
Exactly. But it's the small, consistent changes.
And then don't go out. I always tell people, even if I start a new sport, let's say I start squash tomorrow, but I'm an exercise squash player. Anyway, don't buy all the equipment.
Exactly.
Don't go now.
Including the outfits.
To the bougiest of bougie, outfit store and buy the latest, best, whatever. Commit to 3 to 6 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, before you start that investment, because a lot of people have a lot of stuff in their closet gathering dust.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's
more
very
important
true.
than
Yeah.
anything, I think, is that nutrition you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have a family conversation. Because you cannot, I see people who start and they're making their own meals. Kivyake,
Exactly.
You know?
And you're letting you're eating healthy and letting everyone else suffer. And you're like,
And
really?
also yours is not consistent because then you
Exactly.
get constantly tempted. And after 3,
Exactly,
4, 5,
exactly.
6, 3 months later, you're back on whatever everyone is eating.
And that's why we're saying start small and introducing all these measures. And that's why I was saying, you gradually ease into it. As you said, reduce the chapatis, increase the amount of brown, include more and more healthier options
Yeah.
into what you're, what you're eating. Again, also try to introduce these healthier options to our kids, because sometimes what happens is, as you said, healthier, options that are not healthy are seen as a status or as a reward. Like, as a reward, we're going to go to KFC. And I'm like, well, really, we should be saying as a reward, you're having extra broccoli. Yay!
Yay! Speaking of that, the other day I asked my son, so
Yeah.
what is your favorite food? And he told me ugali, greens, and egg.
And
I
you're
said,
like,
that's my boy.
You're like, that's it right there.
That's him. That's my boy. That's my boy. That's my boy. That's my boy. No, but I try not to influence him because I'm a vegetarian, and
Yeah.
I let him have like the white meats. Pork does not reach anywhere in my periphery, but you try as much as parents,
Yeah.
and to feed them well. Parting words. We have 1 minute.
I would say there's always hope, because I think for the longest time, the narrative has been cancer equals death. I think it's important to know that irrespective of the stage of the cancer that you have, it is treatable, and the goals of treatment might change, maybe to treat, to cure, treat to control, but there is treatment. So don't suffer in silence. I think the ultimate take-home message is we need to take charge of our bodies. Somebody was saying we probably treat our cars better than we treat
No, that
ourselves.
was me. That was me.
That was you?
That was me.
Yes,
That was my
yes,
post.
yes.
And I got a lot of backlash. I said, you take so much time at the car wash, at the
Exactly. You're
mechanic,
there, you're polishing.
insurance, I don't know what. But your body.
Engine oil changes,
Imagine,
whatever. And you're like,
imagine.
what about your internal engine? When did it last go in for a service? You know?
She is Dr. Miriam Mutebi. She is a breast cancer surgeon. Thank you so much for joining me on Double O Direct. And have yourself a phenomenal weekend.
Thank you. Let's take charge of our health this month, and not just this month, every month.